So excited to welcome our two presenters this afternoon, and so excited for the conversation that will follow. But without further ado, I want to introduce Allegra Davis, who's a second-year MA student in the history of art and architecture at Boston University, with a focus on 19th century American sculpture and women artists. She holds a BA in classics from Smith College and has more than 5 years of curatorial experience working with American art at St. Gaudens National Historical Park and Frederic Church's Olana, where she curated Afterglow, Frederic Church, and the Landscape of Memory in 2024. It's great to see Allegra, a familiar face, today for this afternoon's webinar. And I also am so thrilled to welcome our wonderful colleague from across the river, Amanda Malmstrom, who is the Associate Curator at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, where she works closely on exhibitions, publications, and collections. She is the co-curator of Emily Cole, Ceramics, Flora, and Contemporary Responses, which is currently on view. So I think folks have a couple more days to view it, but you'll go into that. And she, in 2019, Malmstrom curated the first posthumous exhibition of the work of Emily Cole, and in 2024 published The Art of Emily Cole, the first book devoted to the 19th century artist. We're so fortunate to partner with you on this program and highlight some of your research and scholarship on Emily Cole. And Allegra, it's a thrill to have you back to talk a little bit more about Downie. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you both.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maggie and Carolyn, for that lovely introduction. It's my pleasure to kick things off talking about Emily Cole, and then I will pass things over to my colleague and friend Allegra. But yes, I have been conducting research getting to know Emily Cole since I joined the Cole site in 2018. And I've come to care very deeply about her work and her place in the history of American art. So always a pleasure to be able to share that in a public setting. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Hopefully spending a little bit of time looking at Downie and Emily's flower paintings are kind of a lovely addition to your lunchtime hour. But diving in, Emily Cole was the daughter of Thomas Cole, the prolific artist who we know as the founder of the Hudson River School of American Landscape Painting. But Emily Cole became an artist in her own right and became a prolific and acclaimed China painter. Caroline, if you could do the next slide. Perfect. Yeah, so here we see some of her China paintings. But Emily Cole received critical acclaim for this work. She put on exhibitions in her father's new studio. She was also a founding member of the New York Society of Ceramic Arts in 1892, which advocated for ceramics place in art museums as a fine art. And in our exhibition this year, next slide, Carolyn, thank you. We do explore Emily Cole's career and her work. We have works on paper on view for the first time since they were created by Emily Cole. So it's really exciting exhibition. I encourage you all to come visit if you can. It closes on Sunday, but it's been such a joy to have Emily Cole's art on view. But today I'm going to focus just for the next 10 minutes on Emily Cole's works on paper and her choice of subject matter. Next slide. Emily really found kind of evergreen inspiration in the flora of her Hudson Valley home. We have over 100 artworks by Emily in our collection at the Cole site, which represents more than 50 different species of flowering plants. Next slide. Emily Cole, going back to the beginning, Emily Cole was born in 1843 to Thomas and his wife, Mariah Bartow Cole. When she was born on August 27th, Thomas Cole wrote in his journal, and I quote, "A little girl was given to us. Thank God she seems healthy and sound, and her mother is doing well. May God grant that the gift which we have received will be a blessing to us and grow up to be a worthy member of society." So I think Thomas Cole would be a beaming father today to know that we are talking about his daughter and her work 180 years after he wrote that. But here we have Emily Cole as a 22-month-old on the left and almost a 2-year-old on the right, both by Frederic Church. And I want to thank Maggie for her keen eye in finding the image on the right in Olana's collection. But as many of you on this call note, Frederic Church was Thomas Cole's student from 1844 to 46. So these sketches would have been made when Church was studying with Cole and spending a considerable amount of time with the Cole family at their home, now our historic site in Catskill. Next slide, please. Emily Cole was only 5 years old when her father passes away in 1848. So she never grew up, you know, knowing her father, but his presence was really there through his paintings. His wife, Mariah, kept his new studio kind of preserved as a shrine to the artist. His paintings would have been on view here in this photograph from the 1880s. We see, you know, his art objects, his musical instruments, a painting which we currently have on view at the Cole site, Landscape with Clouds. So Emily Cole would have really experienced her father through his artwork. And also it was her father that introduced her to the art worlds and major artists of her day. Mariah invited artists to visit Thomas Cole's studio kind of as like a pilgrimage. So not only was Emily Cole connected with Frederic Church, but she was also connected with Asher Durand, Charles Herbert Moore, John Mackey Falconer, and Jasper Francis Cropsey. Next slide. And Charles Herbert Moore even included, I think, an image of Emily Cole and her sister Mary in this kind of endearing portrait of our historic site. So Emily Cole probably would have been 25 years old at this time. We see her sitting on the steps. But I love this painting, and I love that the main character in this painting is really the gardens here at our historic site. And for Emily, this is, you know, this is the ecosystem that she grows up in. And so not only is Emily Cole growing up, developing as an artist in the hotbed of contemporary American landscape art, but she's also growing up in this ecosystem of Hudson Valley flora, which eventually becomes her subject matter. Next slide. By Emily Cole's early 30s, she enrolled at the National Academy of Design, which was a premier art school, museum, gallery, and Emily Cole enrolled in the antique school. But the National Academy of Design was founded in 1825, but by 1846, there were limited mixed gender classes. But by the time Emily Cole enrolls in 1875, it was still one of only a few opportunities for women to pursue art schooling in the United States. Next slide. Emily was, as I said, enrolled in the antique school, which trained artists to sketch from plaster casts. That was seen as a very necessary first step to then pursuing landscape painting, portrait painting, history painting in oil on canvas. Next slide. Emily Cole's larger body of work of plaster cast sketches have, we have not yet located them, but we do have some small sketches that decorate the margins and verses of some of her works in our collection. Here we see a sunflower opposite the sketch of a human foot, which, you know, if you didn't know that was a plaster cast, it would feel very Halloween-y very apt for this week. But we see that even though Emily Cole was enrolled in the antique school, she has this really early interest in botanical painting. Next slide. And this painting is actually, we know because she dates it, May 1875. This was actually made the same month she enrolls in art school, and she also marks the location, 27 West 25th Street, which is actually just around the corner from the National Academy of Design near Madison Square Park. So we see, yeah, thank you, that's perfect. So we see that even though Emily Cole is maybe not on the path that National Academy of Design has her perhaps set out to follow. She really kind of finds her own footing as an artist of botanicals. And next slide. And in some ways, this perhaps feels maybe appropriate for Emily as a woman artist. Botany, starting in the 18th century, became established as a field that was seen as more appropriate for women to pursue as opposed to other scientific pursuits. And I love this cartoon sketch from 1830, and we see the personification of a female botanist, and her body and skirt is made up of petals of other plant parts. It's a humorous depiction, but I also feel like it does a great job of illustrating the ways in which botanical illustration became deeply tied to femininity and other ladylike artistic pursuits. Next slide. While an illustrator of flowers, Emily Cole was still firmly positioned within an ecosystem of canvas painters. And I really think that that had a big influence on Emily Cole's work. In the 1910 census, Emily Cole lists herself as an artist, but her subject matter she lists as scenery, which I think is really interesting that she doesn't list herself as a botanical illustrator or artist of flowers, but that she saw herself as a painter of scenery. And thinking deeply about her time and context, I think that the writings of John Ruskin really helped me approach Emily Cole's work and think about her and what she's thinking about as she's making this body of flower paintings. Ruskin was a very prolific and heavily influential art critic and theorist, and really influenced 19th century ideals of landscape. For Ruskin, direct observation from nature was really tantamount and formed the central tenets of a successful landscape painter. And he has some fantastic quotes. In one quote, he said that young artists should, quote, "go into nature in all singleness of heart and walk with her laboriously and trustingly, rejecting nothing, believing all things to be right and good, and rejoicing always in the truth." So here I actually have one of my iPhone pictures of iPhone pictures of our gardens, of some purple irises that bloomed this year next to Emily Cole's irises. And so I just think her attention to detail, plant anatomy, the ways in which petals also have weight and blow in the wind, I think she really captures that quite adeptly. And I also, I always have Ruskin's other quote in my mind when I think about Emily Cole's work. And he said that if you can paint one leaf, you can paint the world. So it helps me to kind of, I think, reframe Emily Cole's artwork and think about her work in the context of these ideals of landscape that she was surrounded by. Next slide. I think even more in this painting of peonies, I really, again, similar with the irises, there's really this attention to detail and thinking about how plants actually live and bloom and grow across seasons. So actually in this painting, we see kind of in the lower right corner, we see this white bud kind of furled up. And then towards the center, we see peonies that have opened up towards the sun. And then there's a peony at the top left that has already lost a petal for the season. And then at the bottom right, we see a stem that has lost all of its petals. So I really think that Emily Cole was really influenced by these ideas of the allegorical landscape, which we see Thomas Cole was a pioneer of. Next slide. So in our current exhibition, we have that painting of peonies on view next to Thomas Cole's studies for the Voyage of Life. These paintings are on loan from the Albany Institute, but they're practice studies for his larger oil on canvas series, which follow a man from infancy to old age, and using the landscape as the backdrop for that epic story. Next slide. But for me, thinking about Emily Cole's work in context with Thomas, I really have been paying more close attention to the flowers that Thomas Cole includes in his paintings. So on the left, we see his painting for childhood, which is this, kind of Eden-like garden with flowers blooming. And then the next painting for youth, we see, again, this garden, this central tree. But next slide. And the next paintings we see in manhood, especially on the left, to kind of set the scene of the difficulties of adulthood. Flora has completely disappeared from the scene. And then eventually when we get to old age, on the right, we see Flora has returned in the form of a barren tree. Can you go back 2 slides? Thank you. So for me, I think that thinking about Emily Cole, she would have known this, especially these studies very well. They hung in Thomas Cole's studio after his death. I really think there's a very strong influence of the allegorical landscape on Emily Cole's flower paintings. Yeah, one more slide. Thank you. And I think that this Emily Cole working in the second half of the 19th century, this really fits also in line with Victorian ideals of florography, which saw flowers as being rich communicators of certain ideas, mores, and values. And we do know that the Cole family had a subscription to Godey's Lady Book. And I think that in this book, we see kind of the ideas of florography come through in some of the writings and essays. But I love this. There's a story in the 1850 edition of a man he's at a Protestant church service and he's bored, but he fixes his attention on a bouquet at the center of the church. And he writes that the sight of this vase of flowers was like enchantment. It spoke of nature, of beauty, of truth, more eloquently than the service. In observing the relation of flowers to life and character, I've been tempted to believe that a subtle and occult magnetism pervaded their atmosphere, that inscriptions of wisdom covered their leaves, and that each petal, stamen, and leaf was a divining rod or scroll that held an invisible truth. Next slide. So I'm thinking about Emily Cole painting flowers in the context of a society that puts so much weight on the language of flowers. And when Emily Cole had exhibitions of her work in the new studio, a critic actually wrote of this piece, of this china set, that her wild roses seem to live and breathe the soft air, which I think is such a beautiful way to describe Emily Cole's body of work and the ways in which she depicts the flowers of her own backyard. But she really sees flowers as living, breathing organisms that hold deep allegorical possibilities. Next slide. So I want to end a very quick, brief discussion of Emily Cole's relationship with Downie Church, which Allegra will talk more about. But these 3 illustrations of goldenrod, one by Thomas, one by Emily, one by Downie, illustrate over 8 decades of art making in the Hudson Valley. We know that Emily and Downie were close family friends, kind of continuing the legacy of artistic mentorship started by Thomas and Frederic, continued with Frederic and Emily. But we know that, they must have gone on walks together, sketched together. They lived across the Hudson rivers. And we do have a letter of, each other, the 2 artists inviting each other over to spend time together. And I will let Allegra speak more to Downie's practice, but I think there's some really strong similarities, but also differences and different goals in their depiction of the flowers of the Hudson Valley. But I guess I just want to close, and I'm looking forward to questions later. But for me, I think studying Emily Cole's life and work, kind of in the context of her home, her mentors, thinking about the school she went to, for me, proclaim flowers not as empty decoration, but as rich meditations on the cycles of life that really fall in line with Gilded Age ideas about the rich language of flowers. So thank you so much, and I will pass things over to Allegra.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that rich introduction to Emily Cole and reframing of her work. Hi everyone. I'm so excited to be visiting the Olana fold once again and returning to this body of material that I began researching while I was Associate Curator at Olana. And I think it's especially important when approaching the art of Frederic Church's daughter, Downie Church, to consider and put her into these contexts of women painters who were working around her, such as Emily Cole right across the river. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Carolyn. So Isabel Charlotte Church, whose nickname was Downie, was the youngest child of Frederic Edwin Church and Isabel Carnes Church, who was born at their farm, which would become Olana in 1871. So Downie was the youngest of four surviving siblings. She had three older brothers, and she was born when the family was still living at the farm portion of Olana. The big main house that we think of as kind of the icon of Olana today was nearing completion. So Downie would probably have mostly remembered growing up in the big house. But her life at Olana was surrounded by this meeting of art and landscape and nature. Certainly through her father, Frederic Church, the student of Thomas Cole, who took up the mantle as America's most famous, most commercially successful landscape painter of the mid-19th century, and the landscape ideal that he created at Olana, carefully sculpting the Hudson Valley landscape into this vision of the picturesque and a kind of laboratory where Downie could be immersed in the scientific and artistic observation of plant life. So we can go to the next slide. So Downie grew up in this 250-acre artist-designed landscape and would have been exposed from a very young age to her parents' interest in plants, as well as her siblings and friends. So Downie attended Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, which is still a private all-girls preparatory school, where we know that she took particular courses in botany. She took extra electives in science. We saw this curiosity sparking in her very early. She and her brothers and some of the other local children were also prolific collectors of birds' eggs. I'm showing here on the right the front page of a logbook that Downie and her siblings created. They called themselves the DOS Society, which remains a bit of a mystery. We don't know what that stands for. At least we didn't when I was at Olana, so let me know afterwards if anyone has new ideas. But yes, she was collecting birds' eggs. She would have been out playing, I'm sure, in the landscape. I love this photograph of Downie and her grandmother, Emma Carnes, out riding on one of Olana's designed carriage roads in a donkey cart. And when she was growing up at Olana, at some point, Downie began painting flowers. Next slide, please. The earliest dated paintings by Downie Church that we have in the Olana collection date to September 1890. So Downie had just turned 19 years old, I believe. And we have more than 100 paintings of Downie's throughout her life in the Olana collection. Downie's botanical paintings are all watercolors, and they're all studies that she, for the most part, annotates with the common and scientific names of the plant, the date they were observed, often the place they were observed, and occasionally extra notes. So to me, this indicates that Downie was approaching the art of botanical painting as much from the aspect of wanting to be creative and create something beautiful, but also about voraciously recording the botanical life around her and wanting to keep this archive of the plants that she found throughout her life, both at her homes, where she grew up in the Hudson Valley, of course, also her adult homes, which I'll speak to a little bit later, and her travels as an adult. So we have this wonderful like kaleidoscopic vision of the botanical world through Downie's paintings. Now, unlike Emily Cole, Downie never had any formal art training. And I also never found any evidence that her father Frederic taught her. Whereas we do have evidence that Frederic was a mentor towards Emily Cole, giving her advice about art supplies, who she should know when she was studying in New York. We don't really have that kind of evidence when it comes to Downie. So, a big part of my research has been trying to reconstruct this network of women botanical artists who Downie knew, to think about who her influences were and how she was approaching this art form. So, next slide, please. Of course, there was Emily Cole at the home of Thomas Cole, who, as Amanda mentioned, was a close family friend and was already very well established as a flower painter when Downie was young. So that's one big sphere of influence. But I want to point to a few other remarkable women who Downie was traveling alongside. One was Susan Hale, who was a Bostonian watercolorist. She was a professional artist. She exhibited her work in Boston and elsewhere. She was also a published travel writer, and she was an art teacher, kind of crucially. She particularly mentored young women artists, and she wrote books that were targeted at women aiming to teach themselves art skills at home. So Susan was a close family friend of the churches as well, a very frequent visitor of Olana. And when Downie was a young girl, when she was a teenager, Susan would often act as a kind of chaperone. She did travel with the church family to Mexico when Downie was a teenager, and sort of traveled with her, went alongside her, and again, in the absence of any direct record that there was a mentor-mentee or artist-teacher relationship, particularly looking at Susan Hale's watercolors, which included many botanical studies. We can go to the next slide for some more. And Susan's kind of prerogative of wanting to teach young women to tackle art, to not be afraid to try their hand at painting and watercolor in particular. I find it very likely that Susan was an early influence on Downie. These are just some of Susan's watercolors from the collection of my alma mater, Smith College, actually, where the Hale family papers are held. The life of Susan Hale, her art life, her exhibiting career, is something that definitely warrants more research and work. Another better known figure, we can go to the next slide, was Marianne North, who was a British botanical painter. She visited Olana twice, once before Downie was born, and then again when Downie was a very young girl. Marianne North was a world-traveled botanist and painter. She made it to basically every continent with plant life, every continent but Antarctica, that is. And wherever she went, she was painting in oil on paper or canvas or board the plants that she encountered. Marianne was also very scientifically minded. She's credited with discovering, or rather introducing to the Western scientific world, several species of pitcher plant. So in addition to this artistic interest in finding the beauty in the natural world, the truth in the natural world, these Ruskinian ideas that Amanda was gesturing to, Marianne North was very much a scientist. And similar to Downie, really interested in creating this archive of the plants of the world, the plants that she encountered throughout her travels. With the next slide, we see sort of the culmination of Marianne North's life's work, which is a gallery that she designed for her trove of botanical paintings, and some specimens as well that she collected from her travels. These are at the Royal Botanic Gardens, or the Kew Gardens in London. Downie did visit the Kew Gardens as an adult. She wrote in her diary when she visited that she vaguely remembered when she was very little, meeting Marianne at Olana and hearing about her travels. And if I'm not mistaken, either Marianne North said this or Downie said this, maybe both of them. But at that second visit to Olana, Marianne North brought kangaroo mice back from Australia. And the young Downie, as you can imagine, was very enchanted with these little creatures and Marianne's tales of exotic flora and fauna. So again, we have less of an opportunity, I think, for direct mentorship, given Marianne's more fleeting presence in the social life of Olana, but a early, potentially very inspirational figure who clearly stuck in Downie's mind and would have informed her interest in applying her botanical curiosity to what turned into a lifelong art practice for Downie. So the next slide, I'll just give a super brief sketch of Downie's adult life. Again, this is research that I was starting to work on at Olana, but I am by no means the expert. This is kind of an ongoing inquiry. But Downie married her first husband, Jeremiah Black, who was a lawyer in 1891, so when she was 20 years old, and they moved to York, Pennsylvania, where Black was from. His family was there, and they moved into one of his family homes, which was called Willow Bridges. Very romantic home, and this is an illustration of Willow Bridges from the 1876 Atlas of York County, Pennsylvania. So before Downie moved in, they had a second home, I believe, also in York called Rural Felicity. And while she was at these homes, Downie turned to gardening. She continued her botanical painting practice. She also had some fantastic textile work, which I'll show a little sneak of later on. And she had 3 children with Jer, who she was, of course, embroiled in raising. She did divorce Jer Black and then married her second husband, Ward Howe, who was from Princeton, New Jersey. And her life later on was characterized by quite a bit of travel, again to England, where she visited the Kew Gardens, and Europe. We know she went to Puerto Rico and Alaska, thanks to botanical paintings that she made there. She also traveled with her mother and her sibling Lewis Church a bit more. So while she sort of had these family ties sticking to the northeastern United States, she was a quite well-traveled person, and her interests shine through very keenly with this record that she left us of both her art and her writings. So with the next slide, we have oh, thank you, Carolyn. So a wonderful record of Downie's young adulthood are in her diaries that we have at the Olana collection. This diary that I'm showing is from about 1901 to 1902. So Downie is a young mother. She's about 30 years old. Both of her parents have recently passed away, and in this diary, she is grappling with the legacy of her father and mother, sort of what they left to her, how she feels she was to live up to them. And we get an insight into some of her art practice. In this diary, interestingly, after her father's death, she speaks about inheriting one of his paint boxes from Mexico. She muses that she really wishes that she had the talent that he had. She never mentions painting alongside him or anything like that. It seems to be more of a removed relationship, certainly very admiring of her father's work, but she sees her own practice as quite different from his. And in some ways, fairly. I mean, they were working in completely different mediums, and Frederic Church was the epitome of the commercial artist. His career-making works were all about flash and spectacle, getting his work in front of as many eyes as possible, whereas Downie's work was more of this personal compendium, a painted herbarium, if you will. We don't know that she ever exhibited her work or attempted to sell it. it seems that she just kept all of it her own record, very much for her own study and pleasure. These pages of the diary that I'm showing now are a remarkable insight into her textile practice. After her mother died, Downie began to make a memorial quilt out of her mother's clothing. And in these pages of the diary, we see her experimenting with layering color and texture, working with some of these scraps of fabric. And she notes that in order to really establish the kind of contrast and vivid play that she wants in this quilt, Downie brought in some scraps from her own closet, as well as those of her sisters-in-law. So this quilt, which I'll stop teasing, we can move to the next slide. This quilt becomes a record of the women of the church family that Downie sewed together. A hand-done quilt, and it is in fantastic condition. It was on view for the first time in 2024 with the exhibition Afterglow, when I was really thinking about this quilt as a extension of Downie's art practice and her interest in preserving her family legacy. We also have some information from her diaries that she did other types of quilting and embroidery. I don't know that we have any other examples as spectacular as this quilt, though. Just as a fun fact, this quilt pattern, is called Grandmother's Flower Garden. It's a very famous, well-known quilt pattern that many quilters still know and love today. Whether or not this was an intentional choice, I find it to be a really interesting link of bringing the garden, her interest in the floral, over from her painting into her textiles. So Downie's practice and interest in flowers also went to the cultivation and the observation of these cycles of life in her own gardens at her homes in Pennsylvania. What I'm showing you now is a fairly recent acquisition from the Olana collection that came to us from one of Downie's descendants. We called it the Garden Journal. That's the name that it had in Downie's family. But what we're looking at here is a publication called Nature's Calendar by the botanist Ernest Ingersoll that was intended to be used as a kind of field observation notebook. So the printed columns of this book are quite narrow, as you're seeing here, and it goes through kind of day by day, offering prompts about what kind of changes in the natural world an intrepid observer might find in the northeastern United States each day of the year. What Downie did with this, as you can see here, was just to riotously overtake the provided margins and make meticulous notes about what she was seeing around her homes, what her gardens were doing, and she felt quite free to paint all over the text of this book. It's just such a fantastic document, and I feel so pleased to have been able to get these glimpses of it and understand a little bit more how important really gardening and watching these plants over time was to Downie's practice. I have some more images from the Garden Journal on the next slide. I just couldn't resist. There are also some pages where she sketches insects, so her interest was not limited to the plant life, but she really was looking at this ecosystem that was around her. Again, carrying on this interest that she would have had quite young through to her adult life. With the next slide, I just wanted to show some of her later in life paintings. These are two studies from a trip to Alaska that she took in 1932, and a wonderful photo of Downie and one of her granddaughters, I believe, on this trip to Alaska. It's very interesting to see how her work evolved over time. She tended to get much bolder, richer colors with her paintings, moving away from that kind of quite light-handed delicacy that we saw in the 1890 botanical paintings from Olana. But what really remained consistent was this record keeping and her need to link this botanical study to a time and place. So she could, I think, really track these changes in different types of plants that she saw in their different environments. An idea that whether or not he intentionally passed it on was certainly influenced by her father, Frederic, and his scientific approach to the landscape. So just to wrap up with my final slide here, to reconstruct Downie's life as a sort of non-exhibiting artist, not intending to be commercial or public with her work, I think this was a great example of how thinking creatively and reconstructing a network of women artists can really help to illuminate and put into context the whys and hows of Downie's art. Again, as Amanda mentioned, there is this prevalent idea that botanical painting is a good hobby for middle and upper class women to learn. But with somebody like Downie, who had such a persistent and particular interest in plant life and the natural world, I found it really valuable and insightful to look at some of these alternate influences, both including those of her father and the Thomas Cole, Emily Cole nexus, but beyond, to place her as a quiet participant in what really amounted to an international network of women travelers, botanists, and botanical painters. So with that, I think my time is up, but I'm super excited to get Amanda back and we can answer some questions.
Thank you both so much. We have questions coming in, and it's just so wonderful to see kind of the different ways in which both these women interacted with the content of the flora and the fauna, both in the region and beyond. So thank you for those wonderful presentations. I have a question of my own, which I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start with one that I have as questions are coming in through the audience. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to chime in through the Q&A function. But something that I'm wondering is if you could kind of talk a little bit more about, this idea of mentorship. Allegra, you touched upon it within what you call this kind of network of women engaging with this practice. But I'm so curious about Downie and Emily's specific relationship. To what extent, do we know anything about any texture that you want to give to the relationship between these two women, and perhaps anything that you want to clarify in terms of whether or not they were out painting together or anything like that?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. I think there's a lot we would love to know more about. And I think the positive about being at a historic house museum is that these individuals feel so real. I loved, Allegra, your sharing of the quilt that Downie put together, but so we don't know a whole lot about their relationship, but we do know that the Cole and Church families and the descendants of Thomas and Frederic were in very close communication. And so I love thinking about like Emily Cole's painting of goldenrod next to Downie's painting of goldenrod. Downie, a 19-year-old, and Emily Cole would have been, in her 40s when she painted her depiction of goldenrod. I think there's a lot of conjecture, which we have to do in kind of reassembling these feminist art histories of kind of putting back together these networks. So we do note that they were in conversation. They must have been, but we would love, I think, to know more. Allegra, do you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely. I think that covers it. There is so much to point to a relationship that took on an artistic dimension between the two, and just knowing how frequently the Churches and Coles were going across the river and staying in contact. I'm sure that when Downie had this burgeoning interest in painting flowers, Emily Cole would have been one of those early examples that she would have looked to. But in the absence of, a diary entry or a letter reminiscing about out painting with her friend Emily, we don't have that direct
And just to
flash in the pan.
Yeah, and just to clarify, one of our viewers, Linda, is asking, can you clarify the exact age difference between the two women for
Yeah,
those
so
that are
Downie was
listening?
born in 1871.
Yeah, and Emily was born in 1843, so
So,
Quite a
we
bit.
have
yes, like a generational difference.
Yeah.
um,
And in terms of, someone else mentioned, wouldn't it be great if there were any images of them together or, a diary entry, as you mentioned, Allegra? A question that's come in is, did either women maintain a more scientific herbarium? Was that kind of collecting practice part and parcel of their, process or their hobby?
So, Downie, I don't know that we have an herbarium, but it's definitely something she would have been exposed to. Her mother, Isabel, was an avid plant collector, and we have some of her herbaria from Jamaica in particular, and travels in Europe and the Middle East, still in
Mhm.
the Olana collection. Um, so I would be quite surprised if Downie didn't dabble at least a little bit in that as well.
yeah, in a similar fashion, we don't have any press herbariums from Emily, but her father, we have his herbariums that he collected during travels throughout Europe. And I was actually thinking, Allegra, when you were talking about the kind of connections between between Downie's botanical painting practice and Thomas Cole's herbariums, because he is also really meticulous with his notes and noting the date that he pressed it and the location. So I feel like there's like that shared naturalistic impulse between Thomas and Downie, even though they, never met. But yeah, so no press herbariums, but definitely a practice that was surrounding these two women's practices.
Yeah. And I think two questions that have come in that I'm going to kind of wrap up into a joint question from Dorothy and Diane is, it seems as though women were encouraged to paint. I'm curious how Emily specifically got involved with painting china sets, and to what extent does both of these two women's maybe different or similar economic conditions kind of play into the ways in which they were painting and the media that they pursued?
Definitely. Yes. I think if we had another hour, I might have talked more about Emily Cole's China painting practice. But yes, by 1893, there was over 25,000 women in the United States who identified as China painters.
Wow.
So it was a really robust cottage industry that saw a lot of women from painting China in their homes to painting in more established factories, but it really promised women access to an income, and whether it fulfilled that promise or not, a lot of women pursued that in hopes of making an income in a society at the time that kind of saw women pursuing profit as kind of gauche or unladylike. So I think that the wealth differences between the Cole and Church family, which is so very apparent in just the structures that we have at our sites. I think that might have been an encouragement to Emily to transfer her flower paintings onto China. Her China paintings were the only thing that I have record that she exhibited and sold publicly. Her works on paper, I think, were mostly studies for her works on China.
Yes, for Downie Church, as Amanda started alluding to, the economic incentive to engage in professional art practice was not there. And indeed, considering how young she married, it would have been discouraged for her to pursue any kind of professional career. She married just a year after we have the first dated paintings in our collection. So I think before she even had, I'm not a mind reader of Downie Church as much as I feel close to her sometimes, but I see that just as she might have started getting a real interest, she was married and became a mother and a homemaker, and was quite economically secure. And I think within that structure would have had a lot of social discouragement whether or not she really wanted to pursue the kind of professional career that Emily Cole had.
The exhibition at the Cole site right now, I can't give a enthusiastic enough plug for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. As Amanda mentioned, it closes this weekend basically, so if anyone hasn't gotten a chance, I recommend taking a visit. But I have some questions coming in about that. One which is, are there any plans of touring this exhibition, kind of highlighting Emily Cole's work and some of the work of contemporary botanical and botanical adjacent artists?
Yes. Yeah, we would love to travel this exhibition. It's been we've gotten such positive responses, and it's been really fulfilling to see Emily Cole's work illuminated and on view. And we have the work of 8 fantastic contemporary artists who, in many cases, made new work kind of in response to this history of Evelyn Cole, of this history of botanical painting pursued by women in the 19th century. So yeah, we've had amazing conversations through Emily Cole's work and these contemporary artists. So we'd love to continue its life in some way.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. And I think some questions have come through. You've done such an amazing job highlighting Emily and getting us to know Emily Cole a little bit more. But a lot of questions have come in how to see more of Downie's works and how to kind of access some of what Downie has created. Are there any available archives of Downie's work is a question that's come through. And then we have another question that came from our own wonderful archivist at Olana for you, Allegra, on how you found some of these wonderful treasure troves and wonderful pieces of Downie's own creation. How were you able to kind of trace that within the massive Olana State Historic Site collection?
Yes, well, to answer the first question, as far as I know, the only real archive of Downie's work is at the Olana State Historic Site collection. As I mentioned, there are well over 100, I believe, identifiable Downie paintings in the archives at Olana. And so reach out to our wonderful archivist if you would like to know more about how those could be accessed or how to learn more about them. Uncovering Downie's work was really a multi-year process. I was exposed to a few of these paintings right when I started at Olana in 2019 and 2020. They were featured in the exhibition Cross-Pollination, Heed Cole Church in Our Contemporary Moment, which was a collaborative exhibition between Olana, our friends at Thomas Cole, and the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And those were the very first examples of Downie's work put on exhibition, thinking about the legacies of mentorship and interest in the natural world in this community. So having been made aware of Downie, I really started just taking a deep dive and wanting to see more. I was also very fortunate to be at Olana when some major acquisitions were made from family collections, things belonging to Downie's grandchildren and great-grandchildren that returned. And I do think there is still a lot more of Downie's work out there to be discovered. So that's a really, really exciting thing.
And another question that's come through was Isabel Church, or for that matter, I'm curious if Emily was involved with the Society of Decorative Art. To what extent did ceramicists, ceramic painters identify themselves as creators of decorative art in this time period, Amanda? And just an open question for you both.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that question, and I think it really speaks to a thread throughout this presentations of the communities of these women that these women formed. Emily Cole, we know that she was a co-founder of the New York Society of Ceramic Arts, which I talked about very briefly, which was a community of mostly women ceramicists, china painters, who kind of came together to work to elevate the public perception of their craft. I don't know as much about the Society of Decorative Arts, but I think it might have been a little after Emily Cole's time, but I think this divide between what is considered decorative arts and fine arts and the ways in which communities formed around that, I think are really interesting, because I think they became places where women were able to negotiate their identity and artistic worth, and then also just create communities that might give them access to networks of profit and artistic acclaim. So I think that these communities that formed and that Downie and Emily both participated in are definitely worth more inquiry and study.
Yeah, just to tack on or clarify that, as far as I know, Downie wasn't involved in any professional artist societies like this. She kept her work quite private. So again, just to reiterate the importance of looking at Downie's art in this relational way, who she was in contact with, and how she fit in to these groups.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting to think about that kind of status as a kind of non-professional in comparison to Emily, who very much was navigating her art creation in a different way. Christine mentioned that perhaps, that we have a lead here. Isabel Downie had a family friend, Mrs. Jonathan Sturgis, who perhaps was instrumental in founding the group and was the church's close family friend. Virginia Osborne, who was an active in the group as well. So maybe there's something there for future investigation. That's why these webinars are so lovely. We always get additional leads to follow. So I just want to flag for everybody that it is 1 p.m. So thank you all so much for joining us. We have one final question that I think is apropos as we, end our partnership program, which is, although they were just across the river, the Coles and the Churches, how long would it take to make the trip? I know today by car, it's a different story, but somebody chimed in and asked, how long would it have taken folks to make the trip back when Emily or Downie were living at either site?
That would have been a ferry trip. You would have had to, there was a commercial ferry that ran, oh gosh, now my memory is failing me, but from points fairly close to Olana and then over to Catskill. Do you know, Amanda, do you have those timetables in your head?
No, I don't, but yeah, very different than our 5-minute drive today, which I think, I like that question to actually think about a little bit of more labor that went into keeping these friendships and these connections going.
Yeah.
But
it's a wonderful point, Amanda. And Kate, your colleague from the Cole site, Kate, it's wonderful to have you mentioned that they also had a little rowboat, but I love how you flagged that it definitely took a little bit more energy, but we are just a short drive away from each other. So I encourage folks to visit the Cole site. And if you haven't gotten a chance to see this wonderful exhibition that Amanda put together, please do so.
Yes, it is absolutely fabulous. And thank you for inviting me back to chat about Downie and Emily. It's been such a pleasure.
Allegra, always wonderful to have you bring Downie to life. So thank you.
Thank you both. Such a pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining.